wondering why an artist came all the way from Australia to make work about Thomas Jefferson? Who does she think she is? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm an Australian Aboriginal woman with Scottish English heritage. I like to reveal concealed histories and get rid of the whitewash. My mother's Aboriginal language group is Wanyi. We are known as running water people. Our country is cut by the border in northwest Queensland and the Northern Territory. In the latter half of the 1800s, my great-great-grandmother Rosie survived a massacre at Lawn Hill Station. Think plantations here. She and another young girl hid under a windbreak of bushes when the police were killing men, women and children all around them. She sustained a bayonet wound to her upper body, which she carried for the rest of her life. Rosie and the girl escaped to a place where there was water, and while they hid from the police, they submerged and used reeds to breathe underwater. At one stage, Rosie was up in a tree collecting wild honey, known as sugarbag, when her friend signalled to her to be very quiet because the police and their horses were going past. Lawn Hill and nearby Riversley Station were written up in the diary of Carolyn Cray, a young white woman who was riding out beyond the frontier to meet up with her husband working in the Northern Territory. She said, "The blacks were not the only savages in those days, because at Lawn Hill, she said she saw not less than 40 pairs of blackfellas' ears nailed to the slab hut homestead as retaliation for the spearing of cattle. That is my grandmother's mother's country. It goes down through blood and memory and soaks into the ground." Jack Watson, no relation, and Frank Ham, who ran Lilydale in Lawn Hill Station, spoke nonchalantly about shooting blacks out of Barkly tablelands. Frank Ham was known for tying up his gins. That's a derogatory term for Aboriginal women. They were tied up to trees if they were too slow in bringing back the horses, or they were trying to escape. A visitor recalls seeing one of the unfortunate wretches chained and naked with ants crawling all over her person. These women were known as drovers' boys. They did the work of the men, dressed in men's clothes, looking after the cattle on horseback, but also kept their masters warm in their swags or bedrolls at night. My great-grandmother Mabel Daly worked on various stations in Queensland and the Northern Territory as a domestic. Here she is in the middle of the photo, of both photos, with Ruby DeSarchi, an Aboriginal woman who worked as a drover beside her next to the truck. In 1912, Mabel's eldest child, my grandmother, Grace Isaacson, was born on Riversley Station. When Nan was 5 or 6 years old, Mabel took my grandmother, her little brother Paddy, and baby Daisy, running away, because the police used to come to take away the lighter-coloured children. As Nan put it, they cleared out. My grandmother and the other children had been hidden on previous occasions after the mothers were warned by the white manager's wife, Mrs. Donaldson, that the police were coming. This time, they crossed creeks and rivers. They had a little bit of flour and tea. Nan said that her mother would catch fish. She said she would give us the flesh off the backbone. She gave us the best of what she had. I often use an image of the backbone to talk about the strength and resilience of Aboriginal women trying to hold on to their children, their country and their culture. My grandmother ended up working at Moorstone Station from the age of 5 or 6, when her mother Mabel Daly came up to see her with her little brother Paddy with the billy full of berries. "That's not your mother," the manager's wife said, "and that's not your daughter," and prevented Nan, my grandmother, from seeing her mother again. My grandmother said about her mother Mabel, "I can still see her face, poor thing." My grandmother would get very emotional at this memory, and also because she never ever saw her brother Paddy again. It wasn't until my grandmother was pregnant with my mother Joyce, and here she is in the photo here, on Maydown Station in Queensland, that she said she was pushing open some wooden shutters, which you push out with a stick, when Mabel called out, "Is that you, Gracie?" And Nan said they had some lovely times together then, fishing, collecting bush foods, including sugarbag, freshwater mussels, which you dig for with your toes, fruits and berries, kangaroo, bush turkey and goanna, and looking after their children, This was as well as all the usual work on the station, both inside the house and outside. Every time Mabel worked to a different property to work, she moved, Nan remembers that she would have to make a house, dragging bits of tin, wood, securing them and making a home for their family. Rosie, Mabel and Grace were born under the Act, the 1897 Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act. I always laugh about the fact that we're lumped in with Chinese, Aboriginal Chinese under the Act. According to Rosalind Kidd, this applied to every Aboriginal in Queensland. It established a chief protector and regional police protectors, brought all Aboriginal reserves under control of the Act, and defined all reserve superintendents as protectors under the Act. It allowed for the removal, relocation and detention of any Aboriginal people on a reserve, set regulations to cover all conduct on reserves, including the separation of children into dormitories, and forbade any employment except under official contract. This meant that you couldn't travel, marry, vote, own land, and all of this without permission from the protector, and that protector could be the local policeman. The Department of Native Affairs kept tabs on every Aboriginal person. Marcia Langton, Aboriginal anthropologist, commented that Queensland Aboriginal people were among the most documented Indigenous people in the world. When I first looked through my grandmother's file, I was shocked to learn that my great-grandmother Mabel was born in 1900. Her first child, my grandmother Grace, was born in 1912. Grace's father was a white worker on the station. My grandmother remembers being threatened with being sent to an island. She said she didn't know what island it was, but she didn't want to go there and not see anybody anymore. In fact, Aboriginal people were sent to reserves, also known as missions, in locations all over Queensland, including Mornington Island and Palm Island. At Doomadgee in Wanya country, inmates of the mission were flogged if they tried to run away, and the women's hair was cut. The offensive term half-caste or half-blood was used to describe the child of an Aboriginal mother and other than an Aboriginal father. There may have been children from Aboriginal fathers and white women, but this was never discussed in the documents. And this brings me to Thomas Jefferson and his relationship with his slave Sally Hemings and their children. When I first visited the University of Virginia in 2009, I saw an exhibition of Thomas Jefferson's architectural drawings at the Fralin Museum of Art, curated by Richard Guy Wilson. I immediately knew that I wanted this to be the bones of the work that I would make to explore their cross-cultural relationship. Margot Smith, director of the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection at UVA, invited me to be an artist in residence there in 2011. Margot introduced me to Lenny Sorensen, an African-American research historian at Monticello, who showed us around the gardens, which were planted with seeds and stock from around the world, and assessed their capabilities and adaptability, usefulness to Virginia's climatic conditions. Lenny described them as Jefferson's experimental beds. I immediately knew that this would become the title for my work, which also encompassed Jefferson's pursuits across the cultural divide between the sheets with the enslaved woman Sally Hemings. This union between a white man and a black woman, resulting in children of mixed descent, is reflected in my own family in Australia, where the matrilineal line is Aboriginal Australian and the patrilineal line is white European males. I've read various accounts of the lives of the people, both black and white, in Virginia. After visiting Monticello and the University of Virginia and learning about Jefferson's accomplishments, he appears to me to be a visionary and at the same time a very complex character. I imagine him as a racist of his times, in the same way that some of the white men and women in my extended family and their friends have reflected their racism towards Aboriginal people or people of a different colour than their own. Because of my Aboriginality through my grandmother, I was always aware of the other side of racism and who it was directed at. I always felt a champion for my grandmother and felt her hurt when people slighted her or other Aboriginal people in some way. She was a beautiful woman both inside and out and lived up to her name Grace, and I'm very proud to have known her and to be part of her family. She is a Sally Hemings in this story, with the exception that my white grandfather married her. In order for them to do so, they both had to apply for permission from the protector, and much complicated correspondence followed between the Department of Native Affairs and white family members who objected. My empathy with my grandmother's story led me to this story, set here in Virginia. Margot Smith organised on my request to obtain Jefferson's architectural drawings of the UVA's academical village. The beautiful drawings influenced by European architectural styles became the matrix of my work. I worked with Basil Hall Editions in Darwin and with Dean Das and his printmaking students at UVA, creating proofs of the etchings. I drew onto the plates images of the squash from the gardens, the elk antlers collected by the Lewis and Clark expedition that Jefferson sent out to find the Northwest Passage. They now hang in the foyer at Monticello. In the middle of the red silhouette print floats an oblong shape drawn from the back of the head of Eve Ferguson, an African-American woman I met in Washington who works for the Library of Congress. I drew silhouettes of Richard Bell, Aboriginal artist activist who I have shared a studio with from time to time, and Lindsay T.H. Jackson, an African-American woman with Native American heritage who I met when she ran a Pilates class in Brisbane. They are the black silhouettes, I should say the black silhouettes, that create a dialogue with the black silhouettes of white Jefferson family members in the rooms of Monticello. They speak across centuries, spitting pigment onto the paper, demanding respect. Beneath the elk antlers are the rusty nails and shards that I saw brought up from the ground by the archaeologists on their dustpan at Monticello. The objects that look like scissors are the dress fasteners that the black enslaved women would have worn. Their inclusion references the vulnerability of the dresses worn by the women as barriers to the unwanted attentions of the white men working on the plantations, their bodies, the vessels that contained life within them. If my great-great-grandmother Rosie hadn't survived the massacre, or my grandparents from different sides of the cultural divide hadn't met, I wouldn't be here. As an Aboriginal person, I feel an empathy for Sally Hemings and her family, and a remote understanding for Jefferson and his family, separated by prejudice from acknowledging their enslaved family members. I feel the blood from these relationships reaching out to us in a universal will to survive. We live here now, we are right next to you.